The day I lost everything didn't unfold slowly. It collapsed in a single strike, like a crane cable snapping on the docks. I still hear the foreman's voice echoing in my head. "We're cutting you loose, Harris." No warning. After nearly 12 years hauling crates through rain and fog on Seattle's waterfront, I was handed nothing but a cardboard box and a shrug. My gloves, still stained with salt and rust, lay on top of my thermos. That was my send-off after a decade of breaking my back. By the time I walked out through the steel gates, the rain had started, each drop hitting me like the tick of a clock I no longer belonged to. I thought the worst had already hit me. But life, it seems, knows how to pile loss on top of loss until you can't breathe. When I stepped into our small house that evening, hoping at least for the comfort of my children's laughter, Clara was waiting. She didn't even flinch when she said it. "You're useless, Daniel. I'm taking the kids." Just like that, no tremor in her voice, no hesitation. Her eyes were already somewhere else, fixed on a future that didn't include me. The silence afterward was louder than her words. I looked at Lucas's science project, still drying on the kitchen table, Emily's crayons scattered across the rug, and for a moment I couldn't move. My chest felt like it was splitting in two. She walked past me, gathering their coats as if this had been rehearsed. Lucas, only 11, gave me that questioning look, the kind that asked, "Why aren't you stopping her?" "Dad." And Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit, her lips pressed tight to keep from crying. I wanted to speak, to shout, to fight for them, but my throat locked. The only sound I made was the scrape of my boots on the floor as I set down the box of dockside relics. Clara brushed past me, her phone lighting up in her hand. That was when I saw the name on the screen, Martin. My old coworker. He was management, now promoted, while the rest of us broke our backs. I'd trusted him once. Now he was the one she turned to. There's a cruelty in realizing betrayal isn't just personal, it's layered. I lost my job to cutbacks, my wife to ambition, my children to her certainty that I wasn't enough. And in the middle of it all was Martin, the man who had smiled at me across the dock for years now, texting my wife as she packed up our children's lives. I stood in that kitchen clutching the knife my father had given me when I was 16, not because I meant harm, but because it was the last solid thing in my hands. It felt like the house itself was closing, and every photo on the wall a witness to my failure. I wanted to plead with her. Instead, Clara turned, her voice cutting through me one last time. "We're better off without you." Then the door shut, and with it the last pieces of the life I thought I knew. When the door slammed shut behind Clara, I couldn't stay inside that house another second. Every corner felt haunted. The children's drawings, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hall, the echo of her words. My chest tightened until I grabbed the only things left that still felt like mine. The pocket knife my father had given me when I turned 16, and a handful of photos of Lucas and Emily, their faces bright and unbroken by the storm tearing through our home. I walked out into the night with nothing else. The Seattle streets were slick with rain, the kind that turns neon lights into smeared reflections across the asphalt. Each step splashed water up my boots, and the city seemed to swallow me whole. I kept my head down, but the voices in my mind were louder than the roar of passing buses. "She's right. You're nothing. You couldn't even keep a job. You couldn't keep her. You couldn't keep them." The rain grew heavier, soaking through my jacket until I could feel the cold pressing against my skin. It didn't matter. In some twisted way, it felt deserved, as if the world itself was trying to wash me away. I stopped beneath a flickering streetlight, clutching the photographs. Emily's gap-toothed smile blurred under the raindrops. Lucas's curious eyes looked up at me from the page as though demanding an answer I didn't have. I wanted to disappear. The thought whispered, "Just keep walking. Keep walking until there's nowhere left." My father's knife was heavy in my pocket, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of a man who never quit, who told me once, "Son of Harris stands tall even when the world knocks him flat." I tried to hear his voice, but Clara's cut deeper. "We're better off without you." My phone buzzed in my hand. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Sam. My oldest friend, the kind of man who had seen me through high school brawls and broken cars. He must have noticed I was online restless in the middle of the night. I stared at the phone vibrating against my palm, the light casting a glow on the wet pavement. For a moment I thought of answering, of hearing a voice that might tether me back to something human. But shame is a brutal silencer. What could I tell him? That I'd lost my job, my marriage, my children all in one day, that I was wandering the streets like a ghost, clutching photographs like lifelines. The phone kept ringing, then went silent. The missed call stared back at me until the screen went black. I shoved the phone into my pocket and kept walking, the rain blurring the city into streaks of color and shadow. I didn't know where I was heading, only that I couldn't go back. Every step felt heavier, dragging me deeper into a night that seemed endless. Somewhere inside, a voice whispered that this was the bottom. But another fainter voice, quieter than the rain, softer than the shame, asked a question I couldn't yet answer. What if this isn't the end? The rain finally drove me off the streets. My jacket clung to me like a second skin. Heavy and cold, and my shoes squished with every step. I don't remember deciding where to go. I just followed the faint glow of neon, until I found myself standing in front of a diner I'd passed 100 times, but never noticed. The sign buzzed weakly, half the letters burnt out, but the windows glowed warm against the wet night. I pushed the door open and was met with the smell of fried bacon and burnt coffee, a smell that hit me harder than I expected. It was the smell of mornings when life still had rhythm, when the dock whistle told me where I belonged. Now, I was drifting. I slid into a booth in the corner away from the handful of truckers hunched over their plates. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, set a cup of coffee in front of me without asking. I muttered thanks, though my voice barely carried. I stared into the dark liquid as though it might hold an answer. My reflection rippled back at me, a man hollowed out older than 38, broken by a single day. The voices in my head pressed in louder than the hum of the ceiling fan. "She's right, you know. You failed them. You failed yourself." My hands shook slightly as I held the cup, but I didn't drink. I wasn't sure I deserved to. That was when the scrape of a chair pulled me back. I looked up and saw an older man sliding into the seat across from me. His presence was steady, almost deliberate, like he belonged there. His hair was silver-combed neatly back, and his skin bore the marks of decades at sea, sun, wind, and loss etched into every line. He didn't smile, but his eyes locked on mine with a weight that pinned me in place. "You've got the same eyes as my boy," he said, his voice deep and unhurried. I blinked, confused, glancing around as if he might be talking to someone else. "I think you're mistaken." I managed my voice rough. He studied me with unsettling patience, his gaze never wavering. "No. The same eyes. The way your jaw sets when you're holding something back." My son had that look before he disappeared. The words landed heavy, cutting through the fog in my mind. Disappeared. 40 years in a father's memory, and the wound was still raw enough to bleed through his voice. I shifted uncomfortably, wanting to pull away, but unable to. There was something in his eyes, something familiar, as though he carried the same emptiness I was drowning in. "My name's Walter Green," he added, extending a hand that was rough but steady. I hesitated, then reached across the table. His grip was firm, grounding in a way I hadn't felt all day. "Daniel," I whispered. Walter nodded, as though the name confirmed something. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice, and said words that made my chest tighten. "You look just like my son," before he was gone. Walter's words hung between us, heavy as the rain pounding against the diner windows. For a moment I didn't know whether to look away or hold his gaze. Something in me wanted to retreat, to sink back into silence, but his eyes refused to let me. They were the eyes of a man who had carried storms far longer than I'd been alive. He leaned back, folding his weathered hands on the table. "I spent my life at sea," he began, his voice steady, but carrying an undertow of regret. "Cargo runs long voyages, chasing work wherever it came. I told myself I was providing for my family, but really, I was hiding from them." I listened, though part of me wanted to shut it out. His words mirrored thoughts I'd buried deep. He went on painting a picture of nights when his ship sailed into distant harbors, while his wife tucked their boy into bed alone. I'd come home every few months with gifts from ports they'd never see. And every time my son looked at me a little differently, as if I was a stranger, wearing his father's face. Walter paused, his jaw tightening. His hand slipped into his coat pocket and came out holding something small. He set it on the table between us, an old brass compass, its surface dulled by rust, the glass cracked across the face. The needle quivered faintly, but no longer pointed true north. This, he said quietly, was the last thing he left behind. He'd kept it since he was a boy, always saying it would guide him when he got lost. One night, he vanished. No note, no explanation, just this compass left on the kitchen table. Walter's voice cracked on the edges, the first break in his composure. "It's been 40 years, and I've been following a needle that no longer points anywhere, hoping it'll lead me back to him." I stared at the object, transfixed. The cracks in the glass seemed to mirror the fractures in my own life. A guide that no longer guided a father who'd lost his son. How different was that from me standing in my kitchen hours ago, too paralyzed to fight for mine. Silence pressed in around us, broken only by the clink of a fork at another table. Walter's gaze locked back onto me, sharp now, cutting through the haze of my self-pity. Then he leaned forward, his words slow, deliberate, each one landing like a hammer strike. "Don't repeat my mistake." 5 words, simple, unadorned, yet they split something open inside me. My throat tightened, not from despair this time, but from the weight of realization. Here was a man who had spent a lifetime drowning in absence, warning me not to sink the same way. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting to steady my breath. For the first time since Clara's voice shattered me, I felt something stir beneath the rubble of my chest. It wasn't strength yet, but it was a spark. Walter didn't look away. He didn't need to say more. The compass lay between us like a verdict and a choice. Walter's 5 words burned in my chest long after he left the booth. "Don't repeat my mistake." They echoed louder than Clara's condemnation, louder than the factory foreman's dismissal. I sat there staring at the cracked compass until the waitress refilled my cup, and I realized my hands had stopped trembling. For the first time that night, I knew what I had to do. I left the diner with the rain still falling, but it no longer felt like punishment. It was cold, sharp, almost cleansing. I drove through streets slick with water headlights, carving tunnels of light in the dark, each turn bringing me closer to where I knew Clara had gone, her mother's house. That was always her refuge when she wanted to make a point. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach knotted. Lights glowed behind the curtains. Shadows moved inside. My pulse hammered, but Walter's words steadied me. Don't repeat my mistake. I climbed the steps and knocked. The door swung open, and there she was, Clara, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. I swallowed, meeting her eyes. "I came for Lucas and Emily." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Not tonight. They're better off without all this drama." She started to close the door, but I pressed my hand against it. For years I'd folded under her sharpness, retreating to silence. Not this time. "Clara," I said, my voice low but firm. "You can leave me if you want, but you're not taking them away from me." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could answer, another figure appeared in the hallway. Martin. Clean shirt-pressed slacks, that smug look I remembered from the dock when he got promoted. He stepped closer, his voice dripping condescension. "Daniel, you should walk away. You've already proven you can't provide. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." The heat rushed to my face. For a split second, I wanted to lunge to knock that smirk off him, but I clenched my fists, held my ground. Violence wouldn't win this fight. I looked past him, past Clara, and saw the edge of Lucas's face peeking from behind the stairs, wide-eyed. My throat burned, but the words came anyway, steady as steel. "Clara, you can take my pride. You can take this marriage. But you will not make my children grow up believing their father disappeared. I will not abandon them." The hallway fell silent. Even Martin stopped smirking. Clara's mouth opened, then shut again. For once, she didn't have a retort ready. Behind her, Lucas stepped forward, whispering, "Dad." His voice cracked, fragile, but alive. Emily's smaller figure followed, clutching her rabbit. Their eyes fixed on me, searching for proof. I straightened my shoulders, meeting their gaze. "I'm here," I said, my voice breaking, but resolute. "And I'm not leaving." For the first time in years, I wasn't the man who stayed silent. I wasn't the man who let others define him. I was their father. And I was standing. For a long breath, the doorway was frozen. Clara's glare. Martin's silence, the storm pounding outside it, all blurred when I heard that small voice again. "Dad." Lucas stepped fully into the hall, his skinny frame tense, but his eyes blazing with something I hadn't seen in months: hope. Before Clara could block him, he bolted forward, his arms wrapping around my waist with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of me. "I knew you'd come," he whispered, his face pressed against my soaked jacket. My chest cracked open. All the shame, all the doubt, every cruel word Clara had hurled at me, it didn't matter in that moment. My son's grip was proof that I still mattered. Then Emily appeared, clutching her rabbit so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears streaked her cheeks, her small voice trembling as she asked Daddy, "Are you staying with us?" That question cut deeper than Clara's accusations ever could, because it wasn't just a question, it was a plea, a test. She needed to know if her father would vanish into the night like a ghost. I knelt, pulling both of them close, their small bodies shaking against me. My voice cracked, but the words came from a place stronger than fear. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Behind me, Clara shifted uncomfortably, her arms still crossed, but her certainty cracking. Martin cleared his throat as if to say something, but before he could, another voice carried through the hall. "Clara." It was her mother, Marianne, stepping out from the kitchen. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp, but softened by years of watching her own children stumble. She looked at Clara, then at me, and finally at the kids clinging to my arms. "These children need their father," she said simply. "Not just money, not just schedules. They need him." Clara's face flushed with anger. "Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly," Marianne interrupted. "I raised you without your father half the time. Remember, I know the hole it leaves. Don't dig the same hole for your children." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Clara looked at me, then at Lucas's desperate grip on my sleeve, at Emily's tear-streaked face buried against my chest. For once, she didn't have an answer ready. I guided the kids toward the living room, my knees weak, my hands trembling. We sat on the couch together, the three of us huddled under the same blanket. Lucas leaned against me, his breathing uneven but steadying, while Emily nestled into my lap, clutching my hand like it was the last solid thing in her world. For the first time since the factory gates closed on me, since Clara's words shattered our home, I felt something shift. It wasn't victory, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was connection, real, undeniable. I looked at my children, their eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with trust, and I knew this was the fire I had to protect. Not pride, not reputation. Just this, the bond that could hold us together through the storm. The night I sat with Lucas and Emily on that couch became my anchor. It didn't fix everything. Clara's eyes were still cold, Martin still hovered like a shadow, but it gave me a reason to get up the next morning. And the one after that. I started small, the kind of work most people drive past without noticing. Fixing a neighbor's broken lawnmower, hauling boxes for the corner grocery, delivering supplies in the back of an old pickup that coughed more than it purred. The pay was uneven, the hours unpredictable, but each job was a lifeline pulling me out of the wreckage. Every dollar I earned, every calloused palm at the end of a day reminded me that I wasn't done yet. Sam showed up again too, my oldest friend. He found me hunched over a busted carburetor in his garage one Saturday. "You look like hell," he said, handing me a beer. But his grin softened the sting. He didn't ask for the whole story. He already knew enough. Instead, he offered something better a chance. His cousin owned a small machine shop, steady work fixing engines and metal parts. "It's not glamorous." Sam shrugged. "But it's honest, and it'll give you ground to stand on." I took it. The first time I walked into that shop, the smell of grease and steel hit me like home. The rhythm of tools against metal, the hum of machinery, it was a language I understood. For weeks I kept my head down, learning, sweating, rebuilding not just engines, but pieces of myself. And slowly my kids began to see it too. Lucas came to me one evening, clutching a half-finished science project. "Dad, can you help me build this model bridge? I want it strong enough to hold more weight than anyone else's." His trust was written all over his face. We worked late into the night, measuring, testing, laughing when it collapsed the first time. The second attempt held. He looked at me like I was more than enough. Emily's gift was different. She would sit at the kitchen table, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she drew. One day, she taped her latest masterpiece to the fridge, the three of us holding hands, smiling with the words, "Family Forever," scrawled above in rainbow letters. I stood staring at it until my throat closed, because for the first time since losing everything I saw myself in her world, not as a failure, but as her father. One night, cleaning out the pocket of my jacket, I found it the compass Walter had left on the booth table. I hadn't realized I'd taken it with me, but there it was, the glass cracked, the needle twitching aimlessly. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. A broken guide, yet a reminder all the same. I whispered to myself, Don't lose your way, Daniel. Not again. And for once I believed it. Weeks passed, and life found a fragile rhythm again. Work at the shop steadied me evenings, with the kids filled the hollow spaces, and every night that compass lay on my dresser like a quiet reminder. Yet the more I looked at it, the heavier the question pressed. Why had Walter given it to me? One gray Sunday morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I slid the compass into my pocket and drove back to the diner where I'd first met him. The same neon sign buzzed faintly, the same smell of bacon and coffee hit me as I walked inside. My eyes scanned the booths automatically, expecting to see him sitting there waiting with that steady gaze. But the corner seat was empty. The waitress recognized me, her tired smile unchanged. Back again, she asked, pouring coffee before I could answer. I held up the compass. I'm looking for Walter. Walter Green. He was here a few weeks ago. I need to return this. Her face shifted, the smile fading into something puzzled. Walter Green, she repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. Honey, I knew Walter. He used to come in here almost every night, but that was years ago. He passed away over a decade back. The words hit me harder than Clara's accusations ever had. My grip tightened around the compass. No, I said, shaking my head. He sat right there. We talked. He gave me this. She touched my arm gently, her eyes soft. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. I sank into the booth, the world tilting around me. The rain outside blurred against the windows, and for a moment I wondered if I'd lost my mind that night. But the compass in my palm was real. His voice had been real. The 5 words had carved themselves into me too deeply to be imagined. Maybe Walter hadn't been flesh and blood that night. Maybe he was something else, memory spirit, or simply a man's regret echoing beyond his years. Whatever he was, he had found me when I was ready to disappear, and he had pulled me back. I whispered into the empty air. Thank you, hoping somehow he could hear it. When I got home that evening, Lucas and Emily were waiting at the table with a board game spread out their laughter, filling the room like sunlight after rain. I sat down between them, their small hands reaching for mine, and I felt the weight of the promise pressing against my chest. I want you both to hear this, I said, my voice thick but steady. I will never disappear. Not from you. No matter what happens, you'll always have your father. Lucas nodded solemnly, as if sealing a pact. Emily leaned her head against my arm, whispering, promise, I told her. And I meant it. Later that night, as they dozed against me on the couch, I caught sight of the compass resting on the mantel. The cracked glass caught the lamplight, the needle trembling, but still pointing north. Broken, imperfect, yet steady in its own way. So was I. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your feelings in the comments. Share where you're watching from, your city, your country, so we know how far these stories reach. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for more powerful, heartfelt stories that remind us we're not alone. Join this community, and let's keep standing together.